Welcome to Future Mind. I'm your host.
And I'm your expert guide for today's exploration.
Okay, let's dive right in. Have you ever felt like you're being pulled in directions you don't quite understand? Almost like there are these, invisible forces shaping your day-to-day choices.
Yeah, those subtle nudges, right? Things that influence us without us even realizing it sometimes.
Exactly. And they can push us towards behaviors we might not consciously choose. Today, we're taking a really deep look into a topic that maybe on the surface seems incredibly private. The widespread consumption of pornography. But trust me, this isn't just about what happens behind closed doors or, making judgments about individual choices. Not at all.
No, what's really fascinating here, I think, is that we're not just talking about one specific habit. It's more about how looking at this habit can actually illuminate some really fundamental mechanisms, things happening in our brains, and also the subtle incentives that are kind of baked into modern culture.
Right. So it connects the very private to the very public, in a way.
Precisely. We're going to explore how something seemingly personal is deeply connected to our brain chemistry, our psychology, and these wider societal pressures. It really makes you ask, doesn't it? How much of our lives are truly our conscious choice versus maybe an unconscious reaction to these hidden currents?
That's the core question.
Yeah. So our mission today really is to try and peel back some of these layers, to uncover these invisible forces so you can understand them better. And ultimately, the goal is helping you reclaim your personal agency, maybe foster more genuine connection, and live a life that feels more aligned with your own sense of meaning and purpose.
Becoming the author of your own story, essentially.
That's a great way to put it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, let's unpack this then. Because to really get a handle on these invisible habits, we have to start with the brain, right? That incredibly complex organ. We've all heard about dopamine. It gets called the pleasure chemical all the time. But that's, it's a bit of a misconception, isn't it? It really is a very persistent one. I mean, popular culture often simplifies dopamine down to just pleasure, but its actual role is way more nuanced and, frankly, much more critical for our basic survival.
How so?
Think of it less as the liking chemical and more as the wanting chemical. Dopamine is fundamentally the brain's primary motivator. It's the neurochemical driving the anticipation and the pursuit of a reward. It's not really about the pleasure you get when you receive the reward itself.
Okay, wait. So it's not the, oh, wow, this cake is amazing feeling, but more the, ooh, cake, I need to get that cake, let's go feeling.
Exactly. That's a perfect analogy. The wanting system, driven by dopamine, is this incredible evolutionary marvel. It's been honed over millennia, basically designed to ensure we survive by motivating us, sometimes relentlessly, to seek out things we need: food, water, shelter, and really crucially, social bonds.
So it pushes us towards things that are good for us.
Right. Imagine you're incredibly hungry and you start thinking about anticipating eating a really delicious meal. Your dopamine levels surge, but that surge isn't about the taste you're about to experience. It's about focusing your attention, mobilizing your effort, giving you that drive, that push to take action, to hunt, gather, cook, whatever it takes to get that meal.
Oh, okay.
The actual eating, that might bring pleasure, sure, but the drive to get there, that insistent inner push, that's dopamine working hard, it explains why sometimes you feel this burst of energy right before you achieve a goal, but then maybe feel a bit flat once you actually get it.
Right, because the chase is over.
Dopamine loves the chase.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah.
So our brains are fundamentally wired to chase rewards.
Yeah.
But then we step into the modern world, and it's just overflowing with things that feel, bigger, brighter, more intense than natural rewards, almost too good to be true. Which brings us to this idea of supernormal stimuli. Have you ever encountered something like that? Something that just hits all the right buttons, even if you kind of know it's maybe not entirely real or healthy?
Oh, absolutely. And it's such a powerful concept for understanding so much of modern life. It actually comes from Nobel Prize-winning biologist Nico Tinbergen. He did this fascinating work with animals.
What did you find?
He observed that you could create an exaggerated artificial stimulus that would elicit a stronger response from an animal than the natural stimulus it evolved to respond to. His classic example was with birds, like an oyster catcher.
Okay.
They naturally incubate their own eggs, obviously. But Tinbergen found if you presented them with a fake egg, one that was much larger, maybe brighter, with more vivid patterns than their own, they'd actually choose to sit on the fake one.
Seriously, even abandoning their own eggs.
Sometimes, yes, they'd prioritize this supernormal fake egg, neglecting their real ones. The artificial stimulus, because it was exaggerated, basically bypassed their normal instincts and triggered this stronger, often completely maladaptive response.
Wow. That's slightly disturbing. And you're saying our modern world is just packed with these.
It really is.
Yeah.
Saturated with them, often deliberately engineered, to grab our attention and keep us coming back for more, drive consumption. Think about the food industry, highly processed junk food. It's not just tasty, it's meticulously engineered with these precise, unnatural ratios of sugar, fat, salt.
To be irresistible.
Exactly. Maximally rewarding, almost addictive in a way that natural food just isn't. Or video games, instant gratification, constant novelty, clear goals, measurable achievements. It offers rewards much faster and more predictably than, say, learning a real-world skill.
Or social media, right? That endless scroll, the little hits of validation.
Perfect example. Constant novelty, social reinforcement, all in bite-sized, easily digestible chunks. And when we bring this back to our main topic today, pornography really emerges as a particularly potent, you could even say insidious, form of supernormal stimulus.
How so, specifically?
Well, it offers this endless, highly novel, instantly accessible variety of sexual content. It can deliver a much more intense and much more prolonged pleasure signal, or maybe more accurately, that wanting signal we talked about than real-life intimacy could ever consistently provide.
Because real life is, well, real, messy, not optimized.
Exactly. Pornography is the ultimate, curated, always-on, perfectly optimized reward signal, hitting those dopamine pathways harder and longer.
And this isn't just a feeling, is it? Like, there's actual data on how intense the stimulation is for the brain.
Oh, absolutely. This is where the biological impact becomes really clear. So normal, natural sexual activity might typically spike your dopamine levels to maybe around 250% of your baseline, which is significant, right?
Yeah, definitely noticeable.
But consuming pornography, studies suggest it can not only exceed that 250% threshold, sometimes significantly, but it can also sustain that unnaturally high level for hours on end.
Hours. Wow.
Yeah. Imagine that continuous, intense flood of the brain's wanting chemical. This sustained, unnaturally high stimulation is really a key mechanism for how the reward system gets, well, hijacked. It trains your brain to expect and then demand these exaggerated, hyper-stimulating experiences.
And the result is that normal life starts to feel less exciting.
Pretty much. Natural experiences, which offer more subtle, nuanced rewards, they begin to feel less compelling, simply because your brain's been conditioned to chase this artificial, constantly changing, always available superstimulus.
So, okay, the brain's getting flooded with this super high level of stimulation constantly. What happens then? Does it just keep taking it?
Yeah.
Or does it fight back somehow?
Well, and the brain is incredibly adaptable. That's its superpower, really. But it wasn't designed for this kind of perpetual, extreme stimulation. So when it's repeatedly flooded like that, it adapts. And it does this through a fundamental process called desensitization or tolerance.
Tolerance, like with drugs.
Exactly like with drugs. Think of it like turning down the volume on a speaker when the music's been blasting way too loud for too long. The brain tries to protect itself. It effectively reduces its own sensitivity to the dopamine signal. It dampens the response.
Okay, so it turns down the volume. But then what does that mean for the person?
It means they then need to seek out more intense content, more frequent use, more novelty, or usually some combination of all three, just to get back to that same level of satisfaction or stimulation they felt before.
That sounds exactly like the cycle of addiction.
It is the same fundamental mechanism we see in substance addiction and other compulsive behaviors. What happens is the brain's internal arousal templates, its blueprint for what counts as exciting or satisfying, gets fundamentally altered.
Rewired.
Rewired is a good word for it. When it's constantly bombarded with these extreme stimuli, that blueprint shifts. So things that used to feel satisfying in the real world, genuine connection, simple joys, maybe even intimacy with a partner can start to feel, well, lacking, unsatisfying, flat by comparison.
Because the benchmark has been artificially raised so high.
Precisely. Your brain literally recalibrates its expectations toward the extreme, making the ordinary feel, well, just ordinary, or even less than ordinary.
And we can actually see this happening. There's research showing physical changes in the brain.
Yes, there is. Some really compelling research, for example, led by neuroscientist Dr. Valerie Voon. Her work showed that individuals who heavily use pornography exhibit brain activity patterns very similar to those seen in people with substance addictions.
Where specifically in the brain?
They found heightened activity in 3 key areas. First, the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, think of that as involved in anticipating rewards and conflict monitoring. Second, the ventral striatum, that's the core reward center, lighting up with that wanting drive. And third, the amygdala, crucial for processing emotions, both pleasure and fear. In heavy users, these areas seem to be working overtime, constantly pushing for more.
It's like an addiction.
Just like an addiction. And there's even some cutting-edge research suggesting a possible negative correlation between the hours spent viewing porn per week and the actual volume of gray matter in a part of the reward circuit called the right caudate nucleus.
So, more hours might mean less gray matter in that reward area. That sounds pretty serious.
It does sound serious. But, and this is a really important but, we have to be careful about causality here. It's the classic chicken or egg question.
Right. Does heavy use cause these brain changes? Or do people maybe with certain pre-existing brain differences, maybe a higher drive for sensation seeking, end up consuming more?
Exactly. That's a crucial question. And it's an area of very active debate and ongoing research in the scientific community. Most studies show a correlation, a link, but proving that one causes the other is much harder. It's vital to keep that balanced perspective. We see a relationship, but the direction of the arrow isn't definitively pinned down yet.
Okay, so the brain adapts, gets desensitized, maybe even shows physical changes. They sound pretty bleak, maybe even like permanent damage to someone listening. But we talk a lot about neuroplasticity, right? The brain's amazing ability to change and rewire itself. Does that work both ways? Can this process be reversed?
Absolutely. And this is where neuroplasticity is that double-edged sword we mentioned, but ultimately it's a message of hope. The very same adaptability that allows these compulsive habits to form, this powerful rewiring towards hyperstimulation, is also the key to reversing them.
So it's not stuck like that forever.
Definitely not. The brain is remarkably trainable. It can be retrained to find pleasure, real satisfaction, depth reward, and genuine real-life experiences again. But it takes work. It requires consistently choosing and engaging in positive behaviors, creating new, healthier neural pathways.
So it's less about permanent damage and more about retraining a skill, like rebuilding a muscle.
That's a fantastic analogy. Think of it exactly like that. It's a trainable skill, not a fixed state of damage. With intentional, consistent effort, you can absolutely guide your brain back towards finding natural pleasures rewarding again.
That's really empowering.
Yeah.
Now, we focus heavily on dopamine, the wanting chemical.
Yeah.
But you mentioned another important player, oxytocin, the bonding hormone.
Yeah.
How does that fit into this picture?
Yes, oxytocin is crucial. It acts as a kind of natural counterbalance, especially when we talk about genuine connection and intimacy. Unlike dopamine, which is all about the anticipation and pursuit, oxytocin is released during moments of actual connection.
Like physical touch.
Physical touch, sustained eye contact, meaningful social interaction. Think of that incredible bond between a mother and child, or the deep connection in a loving romantic relationship. Oxytocin is fundamental to forming and maintaining those healthy human attachments. It fosters feelings of trust, safety, affiliation.
So it's about the feeling of belonging, of being connected, not just the chase.
Precisely. And here's the critical link. Dopamine and oxytocin systems are deeply interconnected. They influence each other. But when the brain gets that massive dopamine hit from a supernormal stimulus like pornography, something is missing.
What's missing?
The oxytocin release. You get the intense reward signal, the wanting, but you don't get the neurochemistry of bonding, empathy, and real social connection that would naturally come with real-life intimacy.
Ah, so creates an imbalance. All chase, no real connection.
Exactly, an imbalance. The brain registers a powerful reward but misses out on the bonding component. Over time, this can subtly reinforce reliance on the artificial stimulus and, quite tragically, lead to a growing sense of disconnection from real people, real relationships.
So in a way, cultivating real connection, getting those oxytocin hits, could be a natural antidote to being hooked on the dopamine chase.
That's a brilliant way to put it, yes. Our deep, evolved human need for connection is biologically potent. Some research even suggests oxytocin might actively reduce addictive behaviors by counteracting some of the rewarding effects and helping re-engage those social pathways in the brain.
Wow.
Authentic social bonding, real human connection, genuine intimacy. These can be incredibly powerful, natural counterbalances to the brain's over-reliance on those artificial dopamine spikes. It's a pathway backgrounded in what makes us fundamentally human.
Okay, so we've got the brain chemistry down. Dopamine driving the wanting, oxytocin driving the bonding, and the potential for imbalance. But what does this actually mean for our relationships? How does this play out psychologically beyond the screen in how we connect with people day to day?
This is where the impact often becomes very real and often quite painful. The issue is that pornography typically presents this highly curated, scripted, often completely unrealistic version of sex and intimacy.
Like an airbrush version of reality?
Exactly. It bears little resemblance to the actual messy, emotional, vulnerable, sometimes awkward, but ultimately authentic reality of human connection. And when someone is constantly exposed to these hyper-real fantasies, it can create this major disconnect.
How does that disconnect manifest?
It often leads to developing really unrealistic expectations about bodies, about sexual performance, about how intimacy is supposed to look and feel. Your brain's internal map of what's desirable, what's normal, what's satisfying gets subtly rewritten by the fantasy.
So real life starts to seem boring or disappointing.
It can, yeah. Real-life intimacy might start to feel less exciting, less intense, maybe even lacking somehow. And it's not necessarily because there's anything wrong with the partner or the relationship. It's because the brain has been trained, almost conditioned, to chase this unattainable, constantly varied, ultimately artificial standard of reward.
That sounds incredibly damaging for relationships, creating this gap between fantasy and reality. What kind of fallout do we see?
We see significant relational fallout. Research consistently links frequent pornography use with lower relationship satisfaction and stability. There was an interesting Australian study, for instance.
What did it find?
It tracked individuals over time and found that those who reported being easily aroused by pornography were significantly more likely to report lower relationship stability and less sexual satisfaction with their actual partners just 2 months later.
Just 2 months. Wow.
Yeah. It can also fuel conflict, create emotional distance, and sometimes, paradoxically, lead to a diminished sex drive or interest in the partner. And a huge factor is secrecy.
Ah, the hiding it.
Exactly. The secrecy that often surrounds use can massively erode trust. It creates feelings of betrayal, isolation, shame within the relationship. Even if the person using it never intended to cause harm, it just builds a wall.
But it's not just about the relationship impact, is it? You mentioned shame. There's often a really deep internal struggle going on too, right? A heavy emotional layer.
Oh, absolutely. The psychological distress is complex. For many people, the feeling of being addicted isn't just about the behavior itself. It's deeply tangled up with moral conflict, intense shame, pervasive guilt.
Especially if their background or values clash with it.
Particularly, though not exclusively, for people from religious or cultural backgrounds where pornography is strongly stigmatized. This can create what we sometimes call a shame loop.
A shame loop, how does that work?
It's a vicious cycle. Someone might turn to pornography to cope, maybe to escape stress, loneliness, anxiety. But the act itself then triggers intense feelings of guilt or shame because it violates their values.
And those bad feelings?
They reinforce the very negative emotions they were trying to escape in the first place. So they feel bad, use porn to feel better momentarily, then feel even worse because they use porn, which then drives them back to wanting an escape. It's a self-perpetuating trap.
Wanting to escape a feeling, but the escape route just digs the hole deeper. That sounds exhausting.
It is exhausting, and it helps explain why anxiety and problematic porn use often go hand in hand. Anxiety can drive the use, and the use, because of the internal conflict and shame, can intensify the anxiety. The person isn't just fighting a habit, they feel like they're fighting a bad part of themselves. It becomes existential.
Which brings us to that big debate. Is it really an addiction? Like, in the clinical sense, what's the official take on that?
That's a really important question, and honestly, there's ongoing debate in the scientific and clinical communities. The main diagnostic manual in North America, the DSM-5 from the American Psychiatric Association, does not currently recognize pornography addiction as a formal diagnosis.
Why not?
Well, the argument is often about whether the behavior consistently meets all the strict criteria used for substance addictions, things like clear, measurable tolerance across the board, and severe, predictable physiological withdrawal symptoms. There isn't full consensus on that.
Okay, so the DSM-5 doesn't list it, but isn't there another major international classification that does address it? Maybe differently?
Yes, you're thinking of the World Health Organization's ICD-11. It's the global standard. Now, it doesn't use the term addiction either, but it does recognize something called compulsive sexual behavior disorder, or CSBD, It classifies it as an impulse control disorder.
So it acknowledges the compulsive nature.
It does. But there's a very important caveat in the ICD-11 definition. It specifically says CSBD should not be diagnosed if the person's distress comes only from moral judgments or disapproval of the behavior, whether their own or society's.
So it brings us right back to that shame and moral conflict issue. If the distress is only about feeling guilty or ashamed because of your values, it doesn't meet the CSBD criteria.
According to the ICD-11 guidance, yes, that distinction is key. So while it acknowledges that people can struggle immensely with controlling the behavior, it also highlights the powerful role of internal beliefs and moral conflict in shaping that distress.
Okay, so this whole debate, it's not about denying that people are suffering, because clearly many are. It's more about how do we best understand the nature of that suffering to help effectively?
Exactly. It's not about invalidating anyone's struggle. It opens the door to looking at alternative ways to understand it. Maybe it's better framed as a behavioral compulsion, a deeply ingrained habit. Or maybe it's often a maladaptive coping strategy for underlying issues, anxiety, depression, trauma, profound loneliness.
Things that need addressing in their own right.
Precisely. Some critics also point out that symptoms sometimes linked to addiction, like erectile dysfunction, could potentially be explained by other factors like habituation, simple learning effects, or normal physiological refractory periods, not necessarily a formal addiction process.
So the discussion is really about getting more sophisticated in understanding the why behind the struggle.
Yes. Moving beyond a simple is it or isn't it addiction to explore the complex interplay of psychological, social, neurological, and even moral factors. It raises that crucial question. How do we best help someone if the label itself is complex? It pushes for more nuanced, individualized approaches.
Okay, this is where, for me, it gets really fascinating. We start connecting these very personal struggles, the brain chemistry, the relationship issues, the shame, to the much wider culture we're all swimming in. Because these aren't just happening in a vacuum, right? Our society itself might be priming us for some of this. Let's talk about the myth of busyness.
Oh, it's huge. And it influences us constantly, often below the level of conscious awareness. Thinkers like Cal Newport have written brilliantly about this. He argues that with the rise of knowledge work, jobs where you don't produce a visible, tangible thing like a chair or a bushel of wheat.
Right, like coding, marketing, writing.
Exactly. The old clear metrics of productivity kind of vanished. So what filled the void? Visible activity. Things like having a calendar packed back to back, an inbox overflowing with unread emails, constantly being on Slack or Teams. This appearance of being busy became a sort of crude but powerful substitute for actual meaningful output.
So looking busy became more important than actually being productive. It's like a performance of productivity.
In many ways, yes. It's fostered this culture where busyness is almost worn as a badge of honor. It signals importance, high status, being indispensable. The unspoken message is, if you're not constantly busy, you must not be very important or successful.
I feel that pressure, that guilt if you have downtime.
So many people do. Think about the standard answer to how are you? It's almost always, oh, so busy. It's become part of our modern identity narrative.
And technology, our phones, our laptops, they just pour fuel on this fire, don't they? We're not just busy. Our attention is constantly shattered.
Completely. There's a great term for it. Time confetti, coined by Bridget Schulte. It perfectly captures how our time gets fragmented into these tiny interrupted slivers by the constant barrage of notifications, emails, pings, alerts, microtasks.
Little bits of time scattered everywhere like confetti.
Exactly. And this constant context switching, jumping from email to message to task and back again, has a massive cognitive cost. The American Psychological Association found it can slash your actual productivity by up to 40%.
40%. That's huge.
It is, and it doesn't just make us less effective. It leads to mental fatigue, more errors, higher stress levels. Your brain basically never gets a chance to settle into deep focus. It's always slightly on edge, waiting for the next interruption.
Okay, so we're fragmented, stressed, less productive. How does this state of constant mental churn connect back to seeking out hyperstimulation or easy escapes like pornography?
Well, this state of perpetual distraction and shallow work, it perfectly mirrors and actually reinforces that overstimulated brain state we talked about earlier. Yep. When your mind is already feeling fragmented, tired, and kind of craving novelty just from all the switching.
You're already primed for something intense.
Exactly. The quick, easy, powerful dopamine hit from something like pornography becomes incredibly alluring. It feels like an escape, a way to momentarily shut out the mental chaos, the demands, the feeling of being overwhelmed or maybe even inadequate because you can't keep up with the busyness. It's a readily available, potent off-ramp, even if it ultimately leads nowhere fulfilling.
But there's an even deeper cost here, isn't there? Beyond just productivity or distraction, this constant pressure, this living by external rules. What about authenticity? Does it erode our connection to ourselves?
Profoundly. Think about social conditioning. It's how we learn the values, behaviors, norms of our society. Often, it happens unconsciously. These invisible threads of expectations start dictating how we should live, what careers are good, what kind of family life is normal, what success looks like.
So we absorb these rules without even realizing it.
Very often, yes. And the danger is that this can lead to a deep disconnect from your authentic self. You might end up adopting roles, pursuing goals, even holding desires that weren't really chosen by you, but were kind of assigned by societal expectations or family pressure.
Like you're living someone else's life script.
Exactly. You're following a script you never consciously agreed to write. And the result of this subtle, long-term disconnect can be something called misalignment burnout.
Misalignment burnout. How is that different from regular burnout?
Regular burnout is often from sheer overwork, too much pressure, too little rest. Misalignment burnout is different. It's this deep, soul-level exhaustion and emptiness that comes not necessarily from doing too much, but from doing the wrong kind of work for you or living a life that fundamentally clashes with your core values.
So you could have all the external markers of success, the job, the house, whatever, but still feel empty.
Precisely. Drained, unfulfilled, with this persistent, nagging sense of meaninglessness, even when things look good on the surface. It's this quiet, internal crisis of purpose. You feel like you're doing everything you're supposed to do, but something vital is missing.
And that feeling, that internal void, it must create a powerful pull toward anything that offers escape or intensity.
It really does. Just like anxiety can fuel escapism, this deep gnawing lack of meaning, this internal emptiness from misalignment burnout, it makes those quick, powerful, hyper-stimulating escapes incredibly appealing. Pornography or other compulsive behaviors offer an intense, immediate distraction from that void, a temporary jolt of dopamine that masks the deeper unease.
But it just traps you further.
Exactly. It traps you in the cycle of inauthenticity and compulsion. You're seeking an external fix for what is fundamentally an internal existential problem, which, ironically, only deepens the sense of being lost and unfulfilled in the long run.
Okay. Wow. So our brains can get hijacked, our relationships strained, our culture pushes us towards distraction and misalignment. It sounds like a tough spot. What can we actually do? How do we start to reclaim some agency in the face of all this?
It's a great question, and the good news is there are definitely things we can do. The path back starts with intentionality. And really critically, it often needs to start with resetting the brain's reward system.
How do you do that?
A really crucial first step for many people is taking what's often called a 30-day break, or maybe longer, depending on the person from the specific hyperstimulus, whether it's pornography or something else driving the compulsive loop.
Just stop cold turkey. Is it just about willpower?
Willpower is involved for sure, but it's more than that. It's actually a neurological necessity. Taking that break allows your baseline dopamine levels to start stabilizing. It gives the reward system a chance to rest and normalize. It helps restore your brain's natural sensitivity.
Like letting your taste buds reset after eating super sugary things.
That's a perfect analogy. At first, maybe an apple tastes bland if you've only been eating candy. But after a break, that apple tastes incredibly sweet and satisfying again. The same happens in the brain. Natural, real-world pleasures, a good conversation, a walk outside, finishing a small task start to feel genuinely rewarding again in a way they couldn't when the system was constantly flooded.
Okay, so step one is recalibrating the reward meter,
Yeah.
resetting the baseline. But then what? You can't just leave a vacuum where the old habit was, right? You need to replace it.
Exactly. That's the next critical piece. Habit replacement. The most effective way isn't just brute force quitting, it's consciously replacing the old unwanted habit with positive, life-affirming ones that actually meet the underlying need the old habit was trying and failing to fulfill.
And how do you make those new habits stick?
You leverage the brain's own natural reward loop. Remember how dopamine surges in anticipation and you get a feel-good rush on completion? You can deliberately use that. Design your life to get those natural dopamine hits from purposeful action and genuine engagement, not artificial stimulation.
Okay, that makes sense conceptually. But how does that look in practice? What are some actual techniques people could try?
There are several really practical things. One great one is task chunking. Break down big, overwhelming projects or goals into small, manageable steps.
So you get more frequent wins.
Precisely. More opportunities for those little dopamine hits of accomplishment. It builds momentum and makes things feel less daunting. Another key area is tackling that digital distraction, the time confetti.
Yeah, how do you fight that?
Time management methods are crucial. Things like the Pomodoro technique, working in focused 25-minute bursts with short breaks, can be amazing. Or David Allen's Getting Things Done, GTD, method for organizing tasks and minimizing mental clutter. These aren't just about productivity. They're about creating focused blocks of time, minimizing interruptions, and regaining control over your attention span.
So you're building new positive feedback loops based on focus and accomplishment.
Exactly. Reinforcing meaningful effort, not just reacting to the next ping or urge.
Okay, so changing habits, managing time, that's crucial. But we also talked about that deeper issue of misalignment, living a life that doesn't feel like yours. How do you find that internal compass? How do you figure out what truly matters to you?
That's where identifying your core values becomes absolutely foundational. Your values are like your personal North Star, those fundamental beliefs and principles that give your life meaning and direction. You can't steer effectively without knowing where you're trying to go.
How do you figure out your values if you feel lost?
There are some great exercises, often used in acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT. One powerful one is the 90th birthday exercise.
How does that work?
You imagine yourself at your 90th birthday party. Look around the room. What would you want the important people in your life to be saying about you, about the kind of person you were, the life you lived, the impact you had? The answers often point directly to your deepest values, things like connection, kindness, creativity, courage, contribution.
That's powerful, just visualizing that.
It can be. Another prompt is asking, if there were absolutely no limitations, no fear, no money worries, no judgment from others, what would I choose to do with my time and energy? What truly matters? These exercises help cut through the noise of external expectations and reconnect you with your authentic self.
Okay, so you identify your values, your North Star. But knowing them and living them, especially under pressure, that takes courage, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. But here's the empowering part. Courage isn't some fixed trait you either have or don't have. It's a skill. It's a virtue you cultivate through practice.
Like a muscle you can build.
Exactly, like a muscle. Courage isn't usually about one big, dramatic, heroic act. It's most often found in the small, consistent choices to act in alignment with your values, even when it feels uncomfortable, scary, or goes against the grain.
So what would that look like day to day?
It could be what we might call small, daily acts of defiance. Not defying others necessarily, but defying your own inertia or fear to align with your authentic self. Saying no to a request that pulls you away from your priorities. Speaking up with your actual opinion in a meeting. Having that difficult conversation you've been avoiding. Each time you make one of those small, value-driven choices, you build that courage muscle, you strengthen your integrity, you become more you.
Inch by courageous inch. I like that. And finally, all this work resetting the brain, finding values, building courage, it sounds like a lot to do alone. What about connection, community?
You absolutely cannot do this alone, and you shouldn't have to. Reclaiming agency fundamentally involves rebuilding and leaning into your social connections. Remember oxytocin, that neurochemistry of bonding. It's a powerful natural counterbalance to hyperstimulation and isolation.
So connection isn't just nice to have, it's neurologically beneficial.
Hugely beneficial. Engaging with a supportive community, friends, family, support groups, mentors, cultivates resilience, boosts self-esteem, reinforces positive changes. Actively re-engaging, building real intimacy, seeking out meaningful human interaction. It literally helps retrain your brain to find deep reward in genuine bonds again.
It rewires you for connection instead of isolation.
Yes, and this is really important. For anyone feeling truly trapped in shame, anxiety, or compulsive patterns, reaching out for professional help, seeing a therapist, a counselor is not weakness. It is an act of profound courage and a critical step.
Why is that so important?
Because a good therapist provides a safe, non-judgmental space. They can help you unpack the underlying issues driving the behavior, navigate that crippling shame loop we talked about, develop healthier coping strategies, challenge negative thought patterns. They help you reclaim your narrative and build a life based on conscious choice, not compulsion.
What an incredible journey we've taken in this deep dive.
Yeah.
We started with the brain, how reward systems get hijacked by supernormal stimuli, leading to desensitization, that constant chase.
Then we move to the psychological impact, the disconnect from reality, the erosion of intimacy, the heavy weight of shame and moral conflict.
And then we zoomed out, connecting it all to the wider culture, the pressure of busyness, the fragmentation of our time, this deep risk of misalignment burnout.
Yeah.
These invisible forces shaping us.
It paints a complex picture, doesn't it? But the crucial takeaway, the really empowering conclusion, is that change is possible. Neuroplasticity means your brain can change. It's not set in stone.
So what's the path forward again in a nutshell?
It's really that three-pronged approach we discussed. 1, intentionally reset the reward system. Give your brain that break it needs to recalibrate. 2, identify your core values and practice living by them through small daily acts of courage. Build that authentic life. And 3, actively cultivate genuine human connection. Rebuild that social fabric. Tap into the power of oxytocin.
It's not about fixing something broken, but more about becoming the author of your own life, choosing consciously.
Beautifully put. It's about moving towards self-authorship. Maybe the most heroic act in our modern world isn't defying some external tyrant, but consciously choosing a life of meaning, purpose, and real connection in the face of constant demands for busyness, distraction, and superficiality.
Choosing your life deliberately.
Living deliberately.
Yes. So here's a final thought for you, our listener, to mull over this week. Consider this. What is one small, maybe seemingly invisible habit or choice you could adjust starting today? Not just to stop doing something, but to more actively align yourself with a deeper purpose, the authentic connections, the core values you truly hold dear.
How can you start identifying those invisible threads pulling at you and maybe just begin to reweave them into a pattern that feels more like you?
That's your challenge. Something to think about. We'll be back next time for another deep dive. Thanks for joining us on Future Mind.